In the future, humans may need to adapt to a life underwater. There will be many dangers. Scalding volcanic fluids and crushing pressures can kill the unwary. In some ways, it's easier to live in space than here. We know more about the moon than the dark depths of our own planet. The oceans are Earth's final frontier, but we may be forced to take the plunge. And ever-improving technology is making it possible. We may soon live as science fiction writers have long imagined, under the sea.
Gulfstream 40, this is Hydro Shuttle 1. Approaching at 3 knots from northeast.
Roger, Gulfstream 40. You're cleared to dock at the main entry port.
A new undersea colony is coming online, 100 feet below the surface in the warm waters of the Atlantic. Communal domes link rows of living pods. The first aquanaut families are on their way to take up residence. Some have dreamed and prepared for this moment their whole life. For others, this is their first trip beneath the waves. 70% of the Earth is covered with liquid, 7 miles deep in some places.
I do know one thing. The way we're populating this planet, we can't afford to have 3/4 of it unused, essentially. So you can be sure that one way or another, we're going to get down there.
So far, we've only visited. But could we live here if we wanted to or needed to? Imagine that we must build a self-contained colony on the seafloor and build it fast. Some say that climate change and environmental degradation only increase the urgency. If we had 10 years to build a colony where 100 families can survive with little or no support from the surface, could we do it? This is the story of how that might happen.
There are no humans that live in the oceans permanently, none. There are a lot of visitors, but no person, no family, no colony has ever lived there permanently before.
Only a handful are even trying. One of them is Lloyd Godson, a 32-year-old marine biologist. For the next 14 days, he'll be living inside a tiny box 8.5 foot long by 5 foot wide. It's been slowly lowered into a marine aquarium at a theme park in Germany.
Yeah, so far I've only got my camping bed and a little table over here. So I've still got to bring in all my food, the kitchen sink, I've got to put that together.
He's also hoping to generate his own power with a bicycle. But like earlier pioneers in undersea living, he'll have to put up with Spartan conditions. The underwater habitats of the 1960s and 70s were often difficult places to live in.
If we look at the life support systems and the habitation issues of the previous habitats, we find that they were stainless steel cocoons that were very unlivable. No one would want to go live in a place like that for a long period of time.
Like Sea Lab 1, constructed by the US Navy in 1964.
Basic things didn't work. Toilets didn't work. You couldn't get in or out of them in an emergency very easily.
Challenges we have to overcome.
Otherwise, that frontier is close to us, is forbidden. I mean, that's the way it's been. We've got to change that. We have to open that frontier.
First, we'll need to break down the task into a series of practical steps. Find a suitable location. Design watertight living structures. Use materials that can withstand pressure. Build them underwater. Become self-sufficient. Create new vehicles to travel long and short distances. And finally, build a society beneath the waves. Step 1 is finding a suitable site for our colony. We need a place where we can put buildings and people with access to power and food. A place deep enough to insulate us from one of nature's deadliest forces. The hurricanes that periodically ravage our surface waters. Not too deep, because the deeper you go into the ocean, the higher the water pressure and the greater the danger. Just 10 feet down, a diver can rupture an eardrum if he can't equalize the pressure. 1,000 feet down, and a diver's lungs will be crushed. So we must find a sweet spot for our colony. But where? We have better maps of Mars and the Moon than we do of the parts of our own planet covered by water.
We can see space and we can long to be up there. We can't see down.
But satellites equipped with more sophisticated sensors are piercing Earth's hidden ocean depths. This newly acquired data, coupled with improved visualization techniques, is revealing new mountain ranges and valleys we didn't know existed. One possible site for our colony is off the coast of Washington State, a volcanic seamount. Submersibles and unmanned vehicles from research organizations as well as private industry are starting to explore these underwater mountains. What makes them attractive to an undersea colonist is that they're self-contained islands of life, sometimes reaching almost to the surface.
This is particularly true in some of the seamounts of the North Pacific. So the colony could locate there, and they could have this rich source of food from the water surrounding them.
Seamounts can occur near the mid-ocean ridge, the 40,000-mile-long undersea mountain range. Here, volcanic explosions continually add new seafloor. In the dark depths once thought empty, we've discovered islands of exotic life. They thrive on heat welling up from the Earth's molten core. The creatures crowd around black smokers, vents that spew out a scalding mineral-laden brew, ready to be mined.
So instead of digging these things out of the ground, and destroying vast mountain ranges and everything else, you mine the fluid. You've got pure metals, you put those in a skip, you send them to the surface, that's your product.
Zone, where sunlight penetrates down to about 600 feet, and where animal and plant life is most abundant. For that reason, colony planners may decide the best place to build is off the east coast of Florida, along the continental shelf. It extends up to 60 miles from the mainland, with water depths generally under 600 feet. One well-tested site is Conch Reef off the Florida Keys. It's home to one of the world's only active undersea research labs, Aquarius, run jointly by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. For 20 years, scientists have been conducting 10-day underwater missions here. 50 feet below the surface, they're drawn by the same qualities that make it attractive to a colony: ample sunlight and a rich diversity of marine life. But there is a catch. Florida is right in the middle of one of the world's most active hurricane zones.
You would have to make sure that you design your colony structures to be hurricane. You can't afford to evacuate your entire colony.
Two reasons. Humans can't breathe water, and water is more than 800 times denser than air. The extra weight means increasing pressure, 50 pounds per square for every 23 feet a diver descends. The Aquarius Undersea Lab sits at 50 feet, half the depth of our undersea colony, where the pressure will rise to per square inch.
And if you think about being in 100 feet of water, pressure. An external compressor feeds a steady stream of air down to where Godson is.
I have about 230 litres per minute of fresh air coming in through this tube up here you see. That's got a silencer on the end so that there's no actual sound.
His biggest concern is that the compressor runs smoothly. If it an assistant can make sure he doesn't drown in his sleep.
Of course, the security camera needs to be able to see me when I'm in bed, so I have to leave this one on. Then I pull my curtains and say goodnight to my fishy friends.
Jan Koeblik knows as much about living in an ambient pressure habitat as anyone alive. In the 1960s and 70s, he operated undersea habitats in the Caribbean to train astronauts for space. One of those habitats is now an underwater hotel off Key Largo, Florida.
and then you swim out of here and you go up to the pod,
The two cylindrical accommodation areas are separated by what's known as a moon pool.
The first generation of habitats usually had open doors. They were called moon pools. It's like taking a glass, pouring the water out of it and turning it upside down and putting it into water. The water doesn't run into the glass because the air pressure keeps the water out.
Divers here have virtually unlimited access to the sea floor.
We used to spend 2, 4, 6 hours out working in the water at one time, swim back to the habitat, come in, have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. There one goes. Look out the window, kind of reevaluate what had gone on, and then go out again.
Residents of an ambient habitat only need to decompress once at the end of the mission. But after spending a week 100 feet down in our future colony, you'd have to spend 2 days in decompression before returning to life on land.
And so you don't want to do that to Aunt Miriam and the kids when they come down to the underwater habitat. You don't want them to have to decompress for days in order to leave the habitat.
Will an ambient pressure design work for an undersea colony inhabited by 100 families, where aquanauts will spend months?
And I am free. Come on, baby, you belong to me. Sweet kiss makes my engine start. Well, I'm wild and I am free. Come on, baby, you belong to me. Sweet kiss makes my engine start. The way you move, you own my heart. Sweet kiss makes my engine start. The way you move, you own my heart.
Time, 100 feet down. Jan Koblik doesn't think so. Humans didn't evolve to breathe air at high pressure for any length of time.
If you breathe air at a deep depth, you get oxygen toxicity. We think we need to have oxygen, but we only have a small level or a small window of tolerance to oxygen. If you get too much or too little, you're in trouble.
Navy divers working at depth breathe exotic gases carefully calibrated for the higher pressure. Breathing these mixtures day after day can take a toll on the human body. Medical problems pop up, from nitrogen narcosis, a state similar to being drunk, to chronic ear infections caused by high humidity, and more serious ailments like bone necrosis. So in place of the traditional habitat, planners of the undersea colony will need to come up with a radically different design, more like a space station. Most of the structure will have an internal air pressure of 1 atmosphere, the pressure we humans are naturally adapted to. Airlocks will separate living quarters from the work areas that provide divers direct access to the sea floor. These areas must remain at the higher ambient pressure of the surrounding ocean. With 100 feet of water bearing down from above, the structures of the new hybrid habitat must be stronger than any building on land. This will require step 3, using materials capable of withstanding enormous pressure, 60 pounds pressing on every square inch. Michael Shooter designs and builds a range of structures to go on or in the water, from boats to submerged hotels. He uses many of the same materials that went into the construction of the aquarium that houses Lloyd Godson's habitat.
The difference between an aquarium and a habitat is where you're keeping the fish, quite honestly. The engineering that goes into designing the windows and the structures to carry them are very, very similar to what we have to do in an underwater structure. And there's a watertight door here.
Designers had to keep habitat windows small for fear of leaks or something worse.
If you have a catastrophic failure at 50 meters of depth in the ocean, you're going to die. So I can be super confident that after having produced a design for a window or a viewport that's 2 meters by 4 meters, that because of the methods that we have to analyze how that structure is behaving, I can very happily put that into that situation.
In addition to withstanding pressure, clear acrylic can resist the corrosive effect of seawater better than traditional steel. As it does in an aquarium, this material could also give undersea colonists a spectacular view.
Where you're sitting is surrounded by this amazing environment. So absolutely want to maximize the view. We want to maximize the impact of what's going on around. You know, the idea of gardening with corals and giant clams, and you know, this is totally possible.
But designing future living pods and communal spaces to house restaurants and exercise facilities may be the easy part. Getting them on site is the real challenge. Designers may decide the most efficient way to construct the individual modules that make up the undersea colony is in shipyards and dry docks, much like they construct modern submarines. Perhaps the submarine builders will be the ones to do the building, since they have the expertise. They'll need to lower the modules to the sea floor and then link them up to one another. That brings us to step 4. Assembling the undersea colony. Robots can do much of the work, but it will also take a new generation of commercial divers to carry out this ambitious task. Those ready to risk their lives building and maintaining structures underwater. Today, Phil Newton designs and builds submersibles. But he began his career in the chilly waters of Vancouver as a commercial hard hat diver.
You know, it's a very, very comfortable way to dive because you're completely surrounded with air. You know, your head is free completely. You have excellent communication to the surface. You have a constant airflow. There's no effort to breathe.
But commercial diving can also be a hazardous business. The work site can be hundreds of feet down. Surfacing from these depths, divers get winched up in a diving bell and then transferred to a decompression chamber on the support vessel. Here, they'll slowly return to sea level pressure.
So instead of taking a few hours to decompress, when you're living under pressures at 8,000 feet or so on the bottom, it takes you 8.5 to 9 full days to come back to decompress slowly to the surface.
So Newton decided to take a radically different approach that could be a tremendous boon for our undersea colony.
If you can eliminate the pressure, you'll eliminate the enemy. And really, to do that, you need armor, whether it's a submarine around you that can withstand the pressure or whether it's a submarine that you wear.
The result was the Newt suit, and now its successor, the exosuit. These hard suits pressurize to 1 atmosphere and allow a diver to descend as deep as 1,000 feet without the need to decompress.
So you have a pressure housing over top of this, and you have
At the same time, the circular bearings in the wrists and other joints must be engineered to turn smoothly and effortlessly, even when 1,000 feet of ocean is pressing down on them with the weight of a double-decker bus. But Phil Newton wasn't done yet.
Just give it a quick test up and then back into the neutral position. Okay. Yep.
To extend the diver's working range down still deeper, he applied his inventiveness in a new direction.
With the digital revolution, with the electronics that were available now, why couldn't you make a sub that's not much bigger than you are and had powerful thrusters and whatnot and fly you through the water?
It's also fitted with a powerful manipulator arm that allows the sub-pilot to retain some of the dexterity of a diver. With pre-dive checks complete, another new pilot is ready to take his craft into the water. A mini-sub, like Deep Worker 2000, would give aquanauts the freedom to explore the area around their undersea colony down to a depth of 2,000 feet, with no sensation of the pressure.
I want people to be not exposed to pressure. I want them to be able to work and to live and to play at the bottom of the sea without having to pay that enormous price.
As humans, we're naturally
They will not be rugged outposts on the frontier, but they will be attractive cities designed by architects. And in these cities, you will have 95% of it will be at one atmosphere, where the main people live.
It's year 5 of our experiment in undersea living. The main structures of the underwater colony are in place. It's almost ready for the first generation of aquanauts, full-time inhabitants of the deep, to move in. But before they can do so, we have to find the resources, power, air, food and drinking water, to support the undersea colony. Initially, the underwater colony may depend on outside supplies to run all of its life support systems. But it must quickly move to step 5, becoming self-sufficient from local resources.
If you think about what you need to do a colony under the ocean, there's going to be a lot of resources that need to be brought there, including fresh water, including oxygen, including food.
To make all these, underwater first requires energy. It's day 10 for Lloyd Godson in his 14-day underwater mission at the theme park aquarium. One of his main goals is to generate some of his electricity by riding a bicycle. He's aiming to produce 2,500 watt-hours, only things haven't gone as planned. An inefficient generator means up to 10 hours a day in the saddle. High humidity and the 1.4 atmospheres of pressure in the habitat are also taking a toll. Doctors advise him to back off for the sake of his health.
So I did that, but after a few days rest, I'm feeling pretty good, and I'm just doing as much as I can, and who knows, maybe I'll still make it.
2,500 watt-hours powers a few small devices, like a computer. But it's less than a tenth of what the average American family uses daily. And with 100 families set to take up residence, the undersea colony will need at least 3 million watt-hours a day to keep all its systems running. Because power is so critical, the colony can't rely on a single source. So they've laid snake-like wave energy converters on the surface to ride the swells. The waves drive hydraulic rams mounted between the sections producing electricity. But the real power lies further down and out to sea.
The structure here is what's called the Miami Terrace. That's where the maximum flow is, and that's, of course, where we want to put our stuff.
Right.
So at least we got that right.
At Florida Atlantic University's Center for Ocean Energy Technology, Dr. Howard Hansen is testing ways to harness a vast and steady stream of water that runs about 10 miles off the Florida coast, the Gulf Stream.
It's a tremendous amount of water. It is 30 million cubic meters of water per second that flows by our doorstep out here in South Florida.
With a flow greater than all the world's rivers combined, the Gulf Stream is an extremely reliable source for power generation. 100 feet down, 4 twin turbines spinning like underwater windmills supply the colony with all the electricity it needs. With that ample power supply, the colony can take care of 2 other critical needs: pumping oxygen from the surface and distilling fresh water from the surrounding seawater. But it still needs a reliable way to remove the carbon dioxide aquanauts will constantly be exhaling. Planners are likely to turn to Mother Nature for help in removing carbon dioxide and other wastes from the undersea colony. It's a method that Lloyd Godson experimented with in an earlier underwater habitat. The air in the habitat was run through a coil filled with single-cell algae called chlorella. Like all green plants, they needed CO2 to grow.
Okay, I'm just checking the pH from the algae culture now.
But the system failed to work efficiently. By day 12, his blood pressure was rising to dangerous levels, a sure sign of too much carbon dioxide.
It's pretty high there now, so. You there, Carolina?
My wife made a dive inside the habitat to visit me. She took one look at me and said, "You need to come out." And I respected that because I thought she knows me better than anyone and she can see I'm not looking good.
Now, an improved process for growing the same algae is being developed.
So this is chlorella, right?
Yes, this is a chlorella.
Bioengineer Jonathan Trent
ocean. That's what we're doing that's different. We're moving it offshore.
That same technology, with a few modifications, could be adapted to support the undersea colony. Long plastic membranes will be unfurled from anchors on the sea floor. They're filled with green algae, which act as living CO2 scrubbers. They do it through photosynthesis, using sunlight from above, and carbon dioxide.
The algae could be scrubbing that CO2, growing more algae, and producing oxygen, which could be pumped back down to the colony. And those same algae could live off the wastewater of the colony, turning that wastewater into clean water.
Every few days, when a fresh algae crop is ready, the bags could be reeled in and harvested. The algae can be turned into biofuel, but the undersea colony can use it instead as a food source. As much as 50% of the dry weight of algae is high-quality protein. But a steady diet of algae balls and algae pasta, washed down with algae smoothies, would almost certainly set off an undersea mutiny. The colony will need to find ways to diversify its food supply. Today's underwater habitats function like artificial reefs attracting fish. For a future colony, this could become the basis for both a sustainable fishery and undersea aquaculture. And there'll be plenty of challenges for aspiring undersea chefs. The arriving aquanauts are welcomed into their new world by inquisitive marine mammals, here to investigate their novel-looking craft. Step 6 for our imaginary subsea colony is to create a new generation of underwater vehicles.
Oh my God, he's coming right at me.
Graham Hawkes has spent a lifetime developing vehicles that allow humans to experience the ocean and its creatures in a unique way.
I just avoided hitting him. He was just beautiful. He was just beautiful.
Water space is no different than airspace, and we have to make the transition. We have to be able to master that space with speed and agility.
One of his pioneering efforts was a vehicle that allowed him to swim with a pair of dolphins.
I'd become one of the dolphins. And this lead dolphin would look at this little kind of canyon in the coral and just go swooping through it. And I'd go swooping through it, and I'd always hurt my ears. But, you know, It was utterly irresistible to move with those big animals.
Although humans have been venturing into the oceans for more than a century, the basic principle behind the vehicles we use hasn't changed much.
The current generations of manned submersibles go into this beautiful three-dimensional space exactly as balloons of the 1800s. They make themselves heavier than water and they sink. They can wiggle around a little bit, and when they're ready to come back, they make themselves lighter than water and they come back.
Also, they recommend a head 2/3.
2/3, am Also, they moving inside 2/3, sir.
But a state-of-the-art nuclear submarine can do much more than wiggle around. It can travel horizontally through the water at over 28 miles an hour. Its top speed is classified, but it is the undisputed greyhound of the deep. For all its modern refinements, the nuclear submarine still operates like an underwater balloon. When diving, it floods its ballast tanks with water, and to surface, it blows them full of air. The balloon concept will also work for the short shuttle ride from the surface down to the colony. But once they take up residence, these aquanauts will want a craft with greater maneuverability to explore their new underwater environment.
Starboard power up. Forward power. Map enabled.
At Hawke's Ocean Technologies, engineers put one of their latest vehicles, the Super Falcon, through a pre-dive check.
I'm in love with that. What that lets me do, or I could take anyone with me, is to go in the ocean and move with big animals. I mean, it's flight.
Flight enabled.
Hawkes believes that to truly explore the two-thirds
all we've done is taken everything that happened with flight in there and applied it to a fluid which is 850 times denser.
Throttle enable. Clear prop.
Prop clear.
Once in the ocean, deep flight Super Falcon can travel at a speed of up to 7 miles an hour. And it can dive beyond the reach of light to a maximum depth of 1,000 feet. The occupants are no longer restricted to what they can see through the tiny portholes. Like the windows of the undersea colony itself, the vehicle's twin cockpits are made of pressure-resistant acrylic that affords a panoramic view. But to start with, aquanauts will have plenty to explore closer to home. It's taken almost 10 years to establish a self-sustaining colony 100 feet down on the seafloor. The arriving aquanauts get their first glimpse of their new quarters. A large dome houses communal areas, restaurant, school, medical facility, fitness, and recreation area. Leading off the communal space is the main corridor that provides access to the living pods. The space is modest, 500 square feet for a family of 4, but you do get your own private aquarium outside the window. On one of the arms radiating out from the center, a pair of domes houses the life support systems that keep the colony running. Nearby is the hangar, where underwater vehicles and dive operations are based. While much of the colony is kept at 1 atmosphere, this work area can be switched to ambient pressure for easy access to the ocean. Our 10-year mission is finally accomplished. The buildings, the support systems, vehicles, and people are in place. One last step remains. It's now up to the colony to turn itself into a viable community. 100 families have started living in a hypothetical undersea colony 100 feet below the waves of the Atlantic. They've embarked on step 7, becoming a viable community. Much of what they do isn't that different from the lives they've led on the surface. Technicians carry out maintenance work, children go to school, patients go to the doctor, and people work out. But this first generation of aquanauts is also exploring its subsea neighborhood, down to depths of 1,000 feet and more. Just looking outside their windows, they're gaining an intimate knowledge of the ocean that only a tiny few have enjoyed before them.
I spent probably 30 days total living under the sea. There's nothing like it. There is nothing like it. There's something about sleeping undersea, hearing the bubbles of the habitat, looking out the window and seeing the ocean world from all around you.
A world still full of unknowns.
The real payoff are the things that you learn and you see that you don't expect to see and you had no idea was even there to begin with.
And so we've actually had people come down, and it sounds almost silly, follow fish around and see where they spend their time and what kind of habitat they need to do what they do on a daily basis.
From that wealth of observations and scientific data, researchers can begin to extract the seeds of an undersea economy, identifying species that could produce technological breakthroughs.
You hear about, jellyfish and the gelatinous part of the jellies and transparency and how that might play a role in optics, or the skin of octopus and squid and color change and camouflage.
Whether it's mining or medicine, food production or power generation, there are many promising areas of exploration. Life in the undersea colony is beginning to find a rhythm. Meanwhile today, in front of the aquarium window at the German theme park, TV cameras jockey for position. The final minutes of Lloyd Godson's 14 days in a cramped underwater habitat are ticking away.
Good morning, Lloyd. How are you?
Well, good morning, Walter. This is the last time I'll be saying good morning to you from my underwater house, so I'm pretty good.
Especially because last time a faulty life support system cut him short at day 12. Now, he's only seconds away from achieving his 14-day goal. and 500 watt-hours of electricity, enough to run one of these TV cameras for 2 full days. But as he leaves in triumph, one thought refuses to go away. Will 14 days at high pressure have any ill effects on his body?
Although the risk is very, very low at this shallow depth of suffering from some kind of decompression illness, there is always risk.
Back on the surface, everything feels fine at first. A hug for his wife, Carolina.
Catching up with my mum.
The first questions.
Okay, see you then.
But then he knows something is wrong.
I got to the bottom of the stairs, I got quite a light head and was a little bit dizzy feeling, I guess you'd describe it as, and some people say that I lost my colour, went quite white.
The mobile home becomes a makeshift medical station.
And we lay down in the van for the next half an hour and on 100% oxygen.
Within half an hour, the dizziness passes.
I need your bare chest.
Post-dive tests reveal no obvious signs of decompression sickness.
Feeling much better already now. Yeah, I can feel that.
But the incident reminds us of the risks in undersea living. No one knows for sure what the long-term effect of living underwater will be. Divers who must work on the seafloor can minimize their exposure to high pressure, but they can't eliminate it entirely. The rest of the colony can live comfortably inside at 1 atmosphere. Only they'll still face the challenge of coping with confinement and isolation. Some believe that human shortcomings mean we should send robots instead. It's cheaper and less risky. In fact, we already rely heavily on technology to learn about the ocean depths. But at some point, our basic human nature asserts itself.
We are designed to be creatures of exploration. It drives us to the moon. It drives us to Mars. It drives us to create colonies on the bottom of the sea.
Whether we're driven by desire or the need to find new living space, it seems inevitable that humans will begin to move out into the sea.
We're the first generation to see our planet from space and to realize it should not have been called Earth. It should have been called ocean.
And someday, we may call it home.